In all my years of playing games, I have always been skeptical of games that change up an established formula too much. Banjo Nuts and Bolts, Paper Mario Sticker Star, Star Fox Adventures, these are all games in an established series that tried to do something new and groundbreaking by subverting the established conventions of their predecessors, and as a result left a sour taste in a lot of our mouths for a while. Now, not all of these games are objectively horrible per se, but there's always something inherently frustrating about wanting another game in the established style for a long time, and then instead getting something that kinda just shoots that in the face, so I don't think it's unreasonable to be disappointed. Now, sometimes gambling on a new direction can pay off. Super Paper Mario is completely different from the first two games, but it still had plenty to offer with its new setting and tragic characters and very underrated soundtrack. Like, the Super Paper Mario album is a friggin' banger. But then of course you also have Sticker Star, which is like, yeah, okay, so there's no story, it's just Bowser, it's also a turn-based RPG, except you don't level up, so now 50% of the game is a waste of time. Gambling on a change is just that, it's a gamble. Sometimes you hit the jackpot, but a lot of the time you just lose $60. And that brings us to the topic of the video, which should be obvious from the title. Hopefully you read the title, which I probably called some shit like, Doom 3 isn't Doom, bruh, or something like that. Doom 3 is the topic of the video, by the way. Now, if you're part of the Phantom Beano fan club and you've been watching me for a long time, you might know that I am a huge Doom fanboy. I have referenced Doom in some capacity or another in so many of my videos at this point. I pretty much never pass up an opportunity to talk about it, and certainly to play it, and there's almost nothing about it that I don't love. Now, these are not games that I grew up with exactly, but I discovered them in my teens after watching a bunch of old AVGN videos, and I said, damn, that shit's real good, or something like that. I don't know, I was like 14. I first played classic Doom on a Super Nintendo emulator, which is a horrible way to play the game, but I was too much of a cheap bastard to get an actual version of the game at the time. The point is, I really love this shit. And then of course in 2016, a game called Doom came out, and it was fucking like the best game of all time. Until last year when Doom Eternal came out and said, yeah, that game actually sucks, this is the real one. To me, Doom Eternal just annihilated every other FPS game in existence. But it was also around this time that they remastered Doom 64, which is one of the most underrated N64 games, one of the most underrated Doom games, and one of the most underrated games in general. This game is fantastic, and I love that more people get to play it now. To say that Doom 3 went into a different direction from its predecessors is, well, it's not really an understatement, it's just kind of a statement, a factual statement of truth and facts. Now, some of you may think that's a great thing because it's taking a risk, and in general, yeah, I'd say the willingness to take risks is a great thing, but we must also remember the most important fundamental attribute of risks, which is that they don't always pay off. The game came out in 2004, I think, and obviously by this time, Doom was no longer synonymous with FPS games like it was in the 90s. That title now belonged to Halo. Now, Halo was kind of the end of history for the FPS genre. At the time, that was it. There was no way for FPS games to get more innovative or advanced than Halo. And to some extent, that's still kinda true. There is no contemporary FPS game whose mechanics and controls cannot be traced back directly in some way to Halo. And there really hasn't been a groundbreaking paradigm shift in how these games have been played since. It was basically GoldenEye the Squeakwool and how it transformed the genre. This is an infinitely important note to make when contextualizing any FPS game made during this time period. So, we have this new modern take on Doom in the year 2004. Doom is not the king anymore, so now it's gonna take a risk by being a weirdo survival horror thingy. Now, between all the satanic imagery, the intense blood and gore, the zombies and hell demons, the whole shit where it's Mars but it's also hell because reasons, there are a lot of elements of the Doom canon that could easily lend themselves very well to a more survival horror geared game as opposed to the usual badass heavy metal gun shootman affair. Even Doom 64 was, atmospherically at least, way more on the side of a horror game with its dark visuals and ambient soundtrack and puzzles designed to make you feel like an insane person. So on paper, survival horror Doom sounds like it could be a neat idea. But too bad it fucking sucks. That's right, boys, we're gonna actually criticize a video game today. So strap yourselves in for some action-packed game criticism because, oh boy, I got some things to say, let me tell you. Discussions of Doom 3 are often very negative in my experience, that is, if they even exist at all. The truth of the matter is I almost never hear anything about this game, which kinda gives the impression that it's just kinda disappointing as opposed to being like nuts and bolts or something. Even though it was apparently very well received by critics when it was first released, it seems to have left a sour taste in the mouths of many Doom fans. There's even a picture of John Romero himself looking at a copy of the game in disgust before signing it with the words, "I didn't make this." That's brilliant. He just had to let the world know, yeah, this isn't me. It's like when Game of Thrones had that shitty ending and everyone hated George R.R. Martin for it and other people had to remind him that he doesn't actually make the fucking show. So a lot of people don't like Doom 3, but you gotta remember, this is gaming influencers we're talking about, right? We all share a single brain cell that we pass around the table when it's someone else's turn. I say we, although I'm probably not big enough to be considered an influencer, but the point is, we're not smart people, and I'm only maybe 3% smarter than the rest of them, so it's kind of my responsibility to establish the correct opinion. So, what do I think of Doom 3? Well, it's kind of bad, or something. I don't know. The graphics of Doom 3 are absolutely phenomenal, is what I would say if it was 2004. These are definitely dated visuals in many respects, but remember Half-Life? That game looks like a souped up N64 game, but you cannot deny its impeccable atmosphere even to this day. And it's kinda similar with Doom 3, and believe me, if you showed me these graphics back in 2004, I'd probably have a heart attack. I was still playing Mario's at the time, so these hyper-realistic graphics would have blown my dick off. Even today, there are parts of it that still look quite good, like the lighting and shadow effects and the mirror reflections that are still better than Cyberpunk, which came out like 6 months ago. It is worth mentioning that there is the Bfg Edition, which makes the graphics like 5% better among other improvements, but I just bought the vanilla version because I'm a broke bitch and it costs more money, which I need for McDonald's. Now, Doom 3 starts off with this lame, boring-ass tutorial thing where you walk through these shitty hallways to get your mission briefing and then start walking all the way back to where the mission actually starts, and then they give you your guns and shit like 20 minutes into the game. Then you walk around and meet this guy who's been trying to warn everyone about the impending danger of the demon invasion, and then he gets possessed, so you have to kill him, at which point you are given your first taste of the combat. Now, I'm gonna talk about the combat, don't you worry, but first I want to discuss something else. You see, the thing that I, and I'm sure many other Doom boys, love about the other games is how immediate they are. You fire up the game, select your difficulty, select the chapter or whatever, and then bam, you're in the game, and you're already shooting stuff. It's immediate, it's snappy, it's something you can just hop into without worrying about all the other bullshit. Because there is no other bullshit. There's no long, shitty tutorial or dumbass cutscene where they're trying to tell a mediocre story about, oh, did you know that there are hell demons in a Doom game? It's terrible. Doom 16 kinda had tutorials right at the beginning, but it's more like, okay, press this button to glory kill, and then you do it, and then it's like, great job, I'll leave you alone forever now. It doesn't waste your time. The tutorial was built into the gameplay instead of being this shitty intro sequence. Like, okay, I fucking get it, just let me shoot something please, I'm begging you. And that's the first issue with Doom 3. The second issue is the combat. So yeah, they finally let me kill the possessed scientist guy. That's when I discovered that the combat, at least at the beginning, is very underwhelming. The other games were often fast-paced and intense at the higher difficulties. Doom 3, on the other hand, often lacks the punchy and satisfying combat from the other games, while at the same time often having a smaller number of enemies to fight at a time. At the same time, I said time a billion times, time, it's a much slower paced game than the others, which makes you slowly trek through its deadly world. For reference, I played on Veteran, which is the hardest difficulty available for the first playthrough. For my entire playthrough, the game just never quite reached the intensity of the others, and its approach to difficulty often felt very jank in my experience, and not particularly engaging or gratifying, and I'm gonna talk about that later. By the way, Phantom Beano pro tip, if you're in combat and there's boxes to stand on, you're gonna want to do that, because half the enemies will just be incapable of beating you. Some guns don't auto-reload, mode even when you go into the menu and check it, which I looked at the options like 17 times to make sure I wasn't a crazy person. The BFG is a big fucking goof because not only is it not as effective as in the other games, not only do you need to charge it for maximum efficacy, but if you charge for a split second too long, you'll actually kill yourself. I don't even think that merits the dignity of further analysis, so I'm just gonna move on. The dark, moody, atmospheric lighting combined with the pitch black areas wherever there is no immediate light source, the constant barrage of one narrow, tight corridor after another, all of this is excellent for Doom 3's atmosphere, but it's not really good for the gameplay. Doom 3 exists in a transitional phase for FPS games. There's a crouch button and some extremely incidental moments where you can duck and cover and pop your head out to shoot something, but Doom is still largely a movement-based shooter, which is still not uncommon for the time, and it wouldn't really be a problem at all, except that the level design often doesn't give you a lot of room to maneuver, and the speed at which these enemies attack you does not give you a lot of time to do so either, because your own movement speed is slower than molasses, except for when you're sprinting, which is still kinda slow and also limited by a sprint meter that I kept draining because I was just trying to run through the corridors as quickly as possible because I was just trying to get to the other end of the hallway where they were supposedly storing all the fun parts of the game. There were so many moments in this game where I would just be trying to move around during a firefight and there would be just some shitty little piece of level geometry that I didn't see in the way and it stopped me just before I could move to safety. For much of the game, the levels are just straight up not built for this kind of gameplay. There are definitely some exceptions to this, and it's during those exceptional moments where I actually had the most fun with the game. The actual FPS gameplay in Doom 3 often feels like it's playing pretend at being a real Doom game, and when it's at its best, it's not super bad at it actually. Near the end, there are a couple moments with intense enemy concentrations in areas where you get to actually move around and engage in constant shooting and moving, and sometimes if you're lucky, you get actual space to maneuver. Unfortunately, these moments are often few and far between. The majority of the game is going through these shitty hallways and computer rooms and shooting the 4 or 5 guys in there and then trying to solve a crappy environmental puzzle for more ammo, by which I mean listening to the PDA recordings and going through some guy's emails to find some 3-digit code. I wouldn't have called that super big brain puzzle solving, but I mean, Last of Us 2 basically did the exact same thing 16 years later and it won Game of the Year, which it totally 100% deserved for real, so who am I to judge, right? There is an exception to this too, where a log file within the game has a website link to a fictional website that you're supposed to type into your IRL web browser to get a code. Sadly, that link just redirects to the Bethesda Softworks website now, but it's still pretty cool. Gunplay and movement aside, I cannot actually be way too angry at the level design because in the old Doom games, the levels could sometimes be so infuriating to navigate. Like you kill everyone and then you spend an eternity trying to find out where the next room is, and after what feels like 7 years of pressing every wall, hoping to God that you'll find a secret door, but to no avail, you start thinking, okay, well I'm fucking lost, so I'm gonna jump into this lava pit because maybe some dickhead game designer put it there. And then you die and lose your progress and gotta start again. That's when you go look up a YouTube video and it turns out there was some hidden switch behind a goddamn pillar the entire time. And you just wasted precious hours of your life running in circles. Like, oh, funny joke, Doom. That was so hilarious of you. You know what's even more hilarious? Your mother. I don't know, that shit just gets me riled up, I'm sorry. Doom 3 by comparison is far more linear and streamlined, which is a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it's another thing that kinda takes away from its identity as a Doom game, but at the same time, it also cuts out that stupid navigation nonsense that I genuinely did not enjoy from the older games, so I'm gonna give this thing a thumbs up because I'm not a total dickbag. Doom 3's biggest issue in my experience is trying to make Doom into a jump scare horror game by putting an enemy that just immediately attacks on sight behind every single corner and every single door and every single pitch black alcove, or sometimes spawning enemies directly behind you in a room that you just got done clearing, just in case you thought this was going to be a good video game for a second. It is worth mentioning that this game forces you to switch to a flashlight to see in the darker areas, which is really annoying, but also one of the things that they fixed in the BFG Edition, because in that version they have the flashlight always active active even while holding a weapon. So between that and the graphics, I'd say the BFG Edition is probably like 7% better. Not that I played it, but still. Half the times I died in this game was because I was low on health from a previous encounter, and then some dickshit McGee who was sitting right behind the door with a chain gun just immediately one-shotted me the second I got close to the door, and it's almost impossible to dodge. Like, I just really hate these chain gunners. When this game was at its shittiest, I started making bitch save files, which I really hate using, and in general, it's something I tend to avoid in most games, but the thing is, if I have to restart a level in Doom 64, that isn't a big deal to me, because the game is extremely consistent in how often it rolls out the fun and engaging parts, i.e. shooting the bad guys. That's what I'm here for, so if I have to do that again because I died, that isn't a big deal to me. At the same time, dying in the other games always feels legitimate, or at least most of the time, like it's on me, and in my experience, Doom 3 often did not feel that way. On the other hand, so much of Doom 3 is just walking at a fucking glacial pace through empty-ass corridors just to get back to the guy who just got done one-shotting you. It wastes so much of your time on sections that are just straight up not fun or engaging at all, and my brain quickly realized this and said, okay, well, fuck it, I'm not going through an entire boring ass level again because some asshole camping behind a door just immediately killed me, or doing that shitty trailing mission again. Yeah, the thing that Doom has always been in need of is trailing / tailing / escort missions, aka statements dreamed up by the utterly fucking deranged. Okay, full disclosure, this part isn't actually that bad considering there's only like one of these, but I just really wanted to say that line, so yeah, this isn't a huge deal. And that's the other thing, the game is trying to be scary by pulling all these surprises and just putting an enemy that just instantaneously bum rushes you the second you open any door or walk the corner, but it just does it so many frickin' times that it just becomes annoying, and the game just slows back down to, again, a glacial pace, where I either have to memorize exactly when and where these fuckers will show up, or just poke every corner and immediately run back 5 meters and do that for the entire game. I'm not going to act like the other games were entirely innocent on those charges again, but you still often had the speed and the space to deal with it. There weren't really a lot of excuses, so it felt like, alright, well, if you lose, it's probably your fault. In Doom 3, at least when I played it, I didn't really have that experience, and it just felt like the game was being dog piss. Actually, this reminds me of a childhood story. When I was in the 5th grade, I'd be going to the water fountain at school because hydration is important, and this dipshit kid, I think his name was Jacob or something, would do this thing where whenever I was drinking water at the water fountain, this guy would just jump on my back and make some kind of animal noise and be like, "Ha, I scared you," and it fucking pissed me off so much. And to this day, a decade and a half later, I still hate it when another person stands directly behind me, cause I can't help but wonder if they're gonna pull that shit. That's what Doom 3 is like with its jump scares. It just gets really old really fast. It's like a 4-year-old who tells you this shitty baby joke and you laugh the first time to make them happy, but then they keep fucking saying it and you have to keep pretending it's funny even though it sucks. And it makes you want to jump off a bridge, but you can't do that because he's your son and he won't be able to survive on his own if you're dead, and holy shit, I'm gonna be an amazing father. Actually, the 4-year-old child analogy is shockingly accurate, because the more I played Doom 3, the more I realized just how much of it seemed to inform the future Doom games. The few moments where I enjoyed Doom 3, I felt like it was showing signs of things to come in Doom 16, with its occasionally fun shooting sections and its ominous spooky atmosphere. Doom 16 is like Doom 3 grew up and cut out the shitty annoying habits that everyone hates and just became the super cool adult that everyone wants to be. Just like a little kid who doesn't know how to do math correctly eventually becomes an adult who can do calculus, kinda. That's what Doom 3 is. It's the shitty baby kid that cries a lot and can't do math real good that eventually grew up into a PhD student that can bench 568 pounds. Becoming a super cool adult is awesome and amazing, but unfortunately the process of growing up is very painful and chaotic, and that's what Doom 3 itself is. It's a very weird, awkward-ass puberty for the contemporary Doom game, where it hasn't really figured itself out yet. It's a tragic situation where it's most enjoyable when it's not being itself. It's most exciting when it's trying to be a Doom game, while the stuff that makes it unique is also the stuff that makes me want to start drinking again. Doom 3 is a spectacular game from the standpoint of presentation and atmosphere, especially when contextualized within its time period, but the game itself is an underwhelming, often frustrating, claustrophobic clusterfuck of elements that individually aren't really that bad, but they fail in the way that they mesh together. Because they don't really mesh together. In trying to be its own different thing, it often feels like some kind of weird, disparate mix of elements from various games, but there's no unifying direction. There's no really obvious game design philosophy. It just isn't as well thought out or polished or consistent as the other games, and it made me kinda sad. But in spite of all my criticisms, I don't like to think of Doom 3's existence as an overall negative thing. I've been referring to the game as a risk and a gamble, but I want to amend that a tiny bit and call it an experiment. A lot of people will see an experiment that didn't get the desired result and call it a failure, but that is actually a regressive mindset, because even the experiments that don't get the results you want or expect will teach you something. You'll learn what works and what doesn't work, and what to avoid in the future and what not to. There are variables that you can isolate, and that's what Doom 3 is. It's an experiment that didn't yield the desired result immediately, but it taught valuable lessons that informed the experiments of the future, and that makes it a very important game that should be respected, if for no other reason than that.